9:13 in the morning. And on the line with us this morning, Lucs E. Morel and Jonathan W. White. They are the co-editors of the book Measuring the Man, the Writings of Frederick Douglass on Abraham Lincoln. And the visit is presented by Marcus & Mack, voted the best law firm and best personal injury lawyer 4 years in a row in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online at marcusandmack.com. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
It's good to have both of you with us here today. Lucs, just so I can distinguish between the two voices, which one of you is Lucs?
I am Lucs.
Very good. That would make you the other voice, the voice of Jonathan.
That is correct.
Well, the book is so wonderful because it opens our eyes to brand new possibilities. Sometimes we can get just a sanitized version of historical events that are really, really important to America. And the version of the Frederick Douglass Abraham Lincoln story that most times we think of is they were great buddies that used to go golfing together, and between the two of them, they were always great pals who saw things exactly the same way. Not that case at all, and Frederick Douglass is the one who clues us in on that. Was it a surprise to either of you to find out about how Frederick Douglass regarded Abraham Lincoln both before and after he got to know him?
Well, for me, this is Lucs. It was Jonathan and I both teach Lincoln a lot and Frederick Douglass a lot. So you'd think we would have figured it all out by now. But in writing this anthology of pretty much everything Douglass wrote or spoke about Abraham Lincoln, whether it's a letter, editorial, speech, or excerpts from his third autobiography, as the title puts it, Measuring the Man, we figured out that Douglass, while critical of Lincoln and appreciative of Lincoln, most of the book is about the criticisms. Most of the book is about what Douglass saw in Lincoln that fell short of what Douglass thought Black Americans needed in a country that claimed to believe all men are created equal. What Lincoln considered was the central idea of this country as well. And so even though I knew Douglass was critical, I didn't know how consistently critical Douglass was, especially right up until the Civil War beginning and then through the Civil War. And so it's definitely not a hagiography. It's definitely not only the things that Douglass said, that worshipful of Lincoln, nor is it a hit piece on Lincoln. It's kind of a real-time commentary of Douglass as the war is ebbing and flowing, as Lincoln's own political actions are ebbing and flowing in the eyes of the world's most famous Black American, world's most famous Black person, period.
Well, Jonathan, we get the idea that, it was a evolving Abraham Lincoln through the course of the Civil War. And maybe what we see here is that Frederick Douglass did a little evolving as well, at least in terms of how he thought of the way that Abraham Lincoln was conducting the war, and his expectations were extremely low when it was in those pre-war days.
That's right. Douglass is one of Lincoln's greatest critics at the beginning of the Civil War. In fact, when Lincoln is about to be inaugurated president, Douglass writes in an editorial that the South has no reason to secede because he says Lincoln isn't going to do anything to hurt slavery. Douglass goes so far as to say that Lincoln is an excellent slave hound and abolitionism's worst enemy. And so for Douglass, at the very beginning of the war, he looks at Lincoln and he says, this guy is not going to do what we need him to do. He's not going to free the slaves. He's not going to bring about full equality for Black Americans. Over the course of the war, though, Douglass begins to understand the political realities that Lincoln is facing. He begins to see that Lincoln can't just do anything he wants to simply because he wants to do it. And Douglass comes to see this through personal meetings. They met 3 times, and 2 of those meetings were personal interviews that Lincoln and Douglass had together alone in the White House. And in those meetings, Douglass came to see that Lincoln really was pushing for Black freedom as quickly as he could. He was pushing for Black equality in ways that the Northern electorate might be willing to stomach. And he also saw that Lincoln treated him as an equal, as a man, didn't discriminate against him on account of the color of his skin. And so by the end of the war, Douglass has now come to see Lincoln as a friend. And so, yeah, people love to talk about how Lincoln changed over time, but Douglass also came to change over time as well.
He, of course, was very critical of the fact that he did not believe that Lincoln had the end of slavery as one of his goals, but more the preservation of the Union. And during the conduct of the war, he was very, very critical of Lincoln not incorporating black soldiers into the United States, into the Union forces. And as you say, Jonathan, it really is a case of coming around to the understanding of all of the political pressures that were coming from North and South on Abraham Lincoln.
That's right. And you actually see this in the most famous speech that Douglass ever gave about Lincoln. It was an 1876 speech dedicating a statue in Washington, D.C. It's a statue that's been in the news a lot in the last 5 or 6 years. And when Douglass delivered that speech, he recounted all of his criticisms of Lincoln from the view of an abolitionist during the war, that Lincoln seemed dull and slow and tardy when moving towards emancipation. But then Douglass kind of pivots, and he acknowledges that Lincoln's approach ended up being the one that was actually effective in terms of bringing about black equality and black freedom. And in that speech, this is what Douglass says. He says, viewed from the genuine abolition ground, Mr. Lincoln seemed tardy, cold, dull, and indifferent. But measuring him by the sentiment of his country, a sentiment he was bound as a statesman to consult, he was swift, zealous, radical, and determined. And I view that as Douglass kind of acknowledging, in hindsight, Lincoln's approach had been the right one. And if Lincoln had done what Douglass wanted too early in the war, he might have lost the border states, and he might have lost the war, and he wouldn't have been able to free the slaves in the end.
The book is called Measuring the Man, The Writings of Frederick Douglass on Abraham Lincoln. Lucas, when the United States was attacked by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor in 1941, Winston Churchill, watching from afar, said he cheered because he knew that would draw America into World War II and England could be saved. There's a little bit of that feeling in Frederick Douglass upon the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Nobody wants to see it. Nobody can see something like that occur and not know that there are going to be terrible, terrible ramifications and the loss of a great man. But Douglass also recognized that for the black man in America, things would get better because all of a sudden there would be a rallying cry around the rest of American society for the black man because of the death of Abraham Lincoln. Am I reading that wrong, or is there a little bit of that in there?
No, your listeners probably think you're reading it wrong because it goes against the conventional narrative, the story we've all learned about how disastrous Andrew Johnson was, the vice president, becoming president upon Lincoln's assassination. We found out, of course, within the year that Johnson was a greater friend to ex-rebels than ex-slaves. But what we discovered, and we weren't looking for this, but what we discovered is that, we knew that Douglass was exchanging letters with abolitionists in Britain. What we didn't know is that even though he gave them permission to publish his letters in local newspapers like the London Inquirer, the Leeds Mercury, we did not realize that upon Lincoln's assassination, just a few days later, he shared his grief with his correspondents. He mourned a man he considered his friend. What we didn't know that he also took that very occasion to share with a British audience what he did not say in America, which was he thought actually that Johnson would do, wait for it, a better job with Reconstruction than Lincoln would have if he had not been murdered. Now, why is that? While Lincoln's personal qualities, which Douglass got to know through these private interviews, the moderation, caution, amiability, honesty, these helped Lincoln hold the loyal portion of America together in order to suppress the rebellion. Those very personal qualities Douglass thought would not suit him for what would be required during Reconstruction to punish the rebels. He says that from the president now, we need loyal wrath or punitive measures to put down what he considered the slave power that would survive the abolition of slavery. Slavery would be gone, but the ex-rebels, the ex-slaveholders, would still be the ones in control of government, and that was not going to help black people, the vast majority of whom lived in these slave states. And so the bottom line for Douglass was, and here's a quote from this letter that was published in a British newspaper, but something that Douglass did not air in America. He said, Mr. Johnson, Andrew Johnson, is in many respects better qualified for the work to come than was Mr. Lincoln. The black man in the South is going to need someone who's going to protect his rights, someone who's going to give black men, at least, he thought, the vote, and they're going to need that vote to protect themselves politically in the war, in the country after the war is over. Just quickly here, Johnson had given some signs that Douglass thought would make him a good president during Reconstruction. In 1864, October, he, as military governor of Tennessee, emancipates slaves in Tennessee, and then to a black audience in Nashville. In October, he basically says to them, I will be your Moses. And he talks about what life is going to be like for black Tennesseans, a life of equality, and anybody who earns a living will be protected in what they earn. And so Douglass actually thinks Johnson is going to be a way better president than Lincoln because he's going to do what it takes to make sure that the South is not under the control of the planter class.
Some of the eye-opening revelations of the book Measuring the Man, the Writings of Frederick Douglass on Abraham Lincoln. Lucas E. Morel and Jonathan W. White have been kind enough to join us today. Gentlemen, it's a monumental achievement by you. It's on Reedy Press, and you can check it out at Reedy Press and, of course, all of the usual book outlets. You want this book. It's called Measuring the Man. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.